Alright, I figured I might as well do a follow-up on Horizon, seeing as there's been some new developments, and I have some additional thoughts on the film, some responses to some common criticisms. This isn't scripted or anything, but I think I have in mind what I want to say. Okay, so the news is that Horizon Part 2 has been pulled from its theatrical release window. Now, this does kind of surprised me. Parts 3 and 4, I didn't think those were ever going to hit theaters. Parts 3 and 4, I was pretty sure that those were just going to go direct to streaming. But, as far as Part 2 goes, that was sort of that was how the initial thing was sold. It's on all the posters, Part 1, June, whatever. Part 2, August, I think it was the 16th. So I'm a little surprised. I'm not surprised that Part 1 didn't do well at the box office, but I am surprised that Part 2 is not hitting theaters. Now, in all the PR for this news, they say that the reasoning is that they're gonna wait. They're gonna wait longer so that people hopefully discover it on streaming, yada yada. I don't think that's ever going to happen. Or I think that's just PR speak. I don't think Part 2 is going to hit theaters at all. I think it will hit streaming. It will probably hit HBO Max. It's my understanding that the film has completed filming. So while I do think Part 2 will come out, I don't think it's ever going to hit theaters. As for Part 3, as for Parts 3 and 4, I think it does kind of leave the whole thing much more up in the air. It's my understanding that Costner had started filming Part 3, had taken a break to go to Cannes, and was scheduled to, or is scheduled to resume filming in August. As much as the guy's heart might be in the project, as determined he might be to see all 4 parts completed, there is a definite financial reality. There's a certain financial reality that if there is not enough money, if there is not enough interest, that parts 3 and 4 might just never happen. How that might affect the overall trajectory of the story, there's really no telling. Maybe parts 1 and 2 are sort of a more self-contained piece of the puzzle, and then maybe there's like a big time skip. Maybe there's a generation gap between parts 1 and 2 and parts 3 and 4. So there's no real telling how it might affect the proposed story or the proposed story structure. Maybe if the films do pivot to a direct-to-streaming model of release, maybe it can get an influx of cash from one of these streaming services. I guess it would be HBO Max, I think. I think Warner Brothers does have something to do with it. But this leads into one of the other things that I wanted to talk about, which is the common criticism that the whole thing would be better as a streaming television show. I touched on that a little bit in the last video, but I have a few more thoughts on the subject, because it's one thing to say that a multi-part film series would be better as a TV show, but the reality of it is kind of another thing altogether. One criticism that I've heard is that this Part 1 doesn't really conform to a sort of 3-act structure. The Critical Drinker took a break from contemplating the DPS of lightsabers in Star Wars to give a sort of cursory 6-minute review where he spent the first 3 minutes summarizing Costner's career and then giving a synopsis of the film. And then he spent the next 3 minutes of the video basically complaining that the movie was too long, how it was too slow, and that it doesn't conform to the structure of other multi-part film series, like, I don't know, he's probably thinking of The Lord of the Rings or something. That's not a slight against Lord of the Rings. I love Lord of the Rings, but it's one of the same 5 movie franchises that the Critical Drinker talks about incessantly. Okay, so people wanted more of a resolution. They wanted more structure. They have never seen an ensemble piece before, never in their lives, and so they're confused about why all these stories are so different and why they aren't related, even though it explicitly says this is part 1 of a multi-part movie, even though there is a common thread between each story. The common theme between each of the different characters is that their lives have been affected by violence. They are sort of caught up in different cycles of violence. Never mind all that. Okay, so people, they want more structure out of Horizon, but they also think it would be better as a TV show. But the thing is, all these miniseries, they also have a very specific structure. You know, the structure of a miniseries is different than the structure of a film. You know, each episode of a television series, that is also sort of broken down into 3 acts. How many television shows have you seen where each episode sort of ends on a cliffhanger? You know, each episode is sort of designed to get you to click on the next one. And, you know, to say that Horizon should just conform to that format, you're basically saying, you know, you need to change the entire tone and narrative structure of the film. There's also a very specific way in which TV shows are made that is very much different from the way that certain films are made. To say that someone trying to do an independent film, that they are, you know, they're spending their own money, they have the final say, they have final cut, to say that someone trying to do that should just scurry to a big streaming platform that has a lot of different rules, a lot of different criteria for how things get made, for how things get platformed. You know, the writer's strike was very informative in that it sort of showed a lot of behind the scenes of how the sausage is made. There's, you know, little rules of you have to have 12 writers in a room. You have to hire a certain number of people to write your project. You know, how does that work? How does that apply to someone who is after artistic freedom? There's also the fact that, you know, you might be taking the streaming platform's money. You know, say Horizon from its inception was a streaming show, or say that again that parts 3 and 4 take a little bit of money from HBO Max. When you take that money, that then has the potential to make you much more beholden to other people. You have much more of a chance of meddling and interference from the people who are giving you all this money. So both creatively and practically, it's not a one-to-one comparison to say that a big 4-part film can just be squeezed into the most popular, most current way of doing things. The last thing is, I don't want to give the impression that this is strictly a culture war thing. You know, in the last video, I was sort of talking a lot about the reaction from progressive critics, and I don't want to give the impression that the Horizon's success or failure is completely on the whims of the culture war. I think that's part of it. I don't think it's the complete picture. I think in some sense there's sort of a broader culture war than the sort of front and center culture war that sort of everyone is most familiar with. I think there's a much broader sort of culture war going on. Again, I mentioned the critical drinker who did not like the movie, but at the same time, there's a pair of what you might consider more progressive critics who I follow, and they did like the movie. I think regardless of your specific political affiliation, if you are one of these people who is just sort of wading in the most basic of mainstream slop constantly, you know, again, the outrage mill that has sort of gathered around the same 5 mega franchises. I think an environment like that is just as inhospitable to something like Horizon as is the sort of snake's den of mainstream progressive critics. Anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say. Subscribe, why don't you? Subscribe. I want to get to 1,000. I want to see what 1,000 looks like. Other than that, let me know what you think. Okay, goodbye.